Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the hushed, pre-dawn streets of ancient Pompeii. The air is cool and still, broken only by the distant sounds of a rooster crowing, a vendor hauling early morning bread, and a few murmured voices in alleyways not meant for polite company. You pass faded murals and uneven stone roads, and then, tucked between a wine shop and a laundry, you spot it, a low building with small doors and no signage, just a carved phallus above the entrance, pointing the way in. You're not entering to become anyone. You're here to observe, quietly, gently, and with respect. You probably won't survive this if you think Roman brothels were anything like today's scandals or stereotypes. They were far more regulated, more accepted, and far more heartbreaking. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first sound from inside is the creaking of old wood, followed by soft footsteps. The brothel is waking up. The lupanar, literally wolf den, sits just a few blocks from Pompeii's bustling forum, and by Roman standards, it's a modest one. 5 cramped rooms line a dark hallway, each with a single stone bed. No windows, no doors, just cloth curtains and flickering oil lamps on the wall. The women are stirring now, rising slowly from beds made of stone slabs covered in straw or thin wool. There's a single wash basin in the back, a crude affair of chipped clay and tepid water. One girl limps, another splashes water on her face, a third starts combing through a tangled red wig. This is their morning. Every morning. Despite the squalor, brothels like this were perfectly legal in Rome. In fact, sex work wasn't just legal, it was institutional. Prostitutes were required to register with the idols, public magistrates, and pay taxes like any other profession. They were part of the urban fabric, as common as bakers or blacksmiths. Some even argue that Roman brothels were an early form of regulated labor, complete with designated zones and state oversight. But others, just as loudly, say, let's not romanticize it. These women had little autonomy, especially if enslaved. Their daily lives weren't glamorous. They were a repetitive cycle of endurance, survival, and waiting. Historians still argue whether registered sex workers had any real legal protections, or if permission to exist was the best they could hope for. You notice the details now. The walls of the hallway are covered in frescoes, surprisingly artistic depictions of sexual acts, framed like advertisements. Each one is stylized but clear, a visual menu for potential clients. One woman kneels beside a man in a toga. Another lies sprawled across a bed, hair coiled in ringlets, a painted expression of delight frozen forever in plaster. Most visitors assume the women in these murals were idealized goddesses, but local archaeologists suspect many were modeled after the very women who worked here. It was branding. A quirky little fact for your midnight musing. Some of the frescoes have numbers painted beside them. Not prices, those varied. They were more like booth numbers. A client could walk in, point to fresco number 3, and the madam would know which service he expected, like ordering off a menu. But this morning, there are no clients yet. Just quiet movement, the clatter of a chamber pot being emptied into the gutter outside, a soft groan from someone stretching out their spine, and in the main room, a wooden tray appears. Breakfast, sort of. There's a loaf of yesterday's bread, partially chewed by mice at the corner, A few black olives, some watered down wine in a chipped clay cup. The madam sets it down without a word. She's already counting coins from last night, her fingers stained from lamp oil and the ink of the wax tablets she uses for record keeping. The women eat with minimal conversation. Eyes down, gestures slow. They all know what's coming. By now, the sun is rising higher, casting a dusty beam of light through a tiny skylight. Outside, you can hear the city waking up. Horses, merchants, the clang of metal from the smithy down the block. And soon, the footsteps, men walking slowly past the entrance. Some alone, some laughing in groups. All of them glancing sideways at the open curtain, then looking away, pretending they weren't. Inside, the women begin to prepare. One brushes dust off her tunic. Another reapplies white lead face powder, a dangerous concoction that makes the skin look paler and supposedly more appealing. A third reaches for her red wig, adjusted carefully over shaved or short-cut hair, a requirement under Roman sumptuary laws for prostitutes. Yes, even their hair was regulated. Women in brothels weren't just tolerated, they were made visible on purpose. Roman law required that sex workers wear specific colors and styles to distinguish them from matrons, or respectable women. It was a legal version of social fencing. You could never pretend you belonged elsewhere. You overhear the madam berating one of the girls for losing a client the night before. Her voice is sharp, but the girl just nods, quietly chewing her bread. Another woman leans against the wall, eyes closed. She murmurs something in Latin, maybe a prayer, maybe a curse. And that's the paradox of this place. It's built to be hidden, but every corner is exposed. These women were anonymous and notorious at the same time, visible to customers, invisible to society. You step outside for a breath of fresh air. A few doors down, a tavern owner sweeps out ash from the night before. Across the street, a woman in a clean stola passes by with her children. She doesn't look in your direction, but you feel her disapproval anyway. And the brothel, just one doorway in 1,000, goes unnoticed again. The sun's climbed just high enough now to bake the dusty flagstones outside the lupanar. Inside, the shadows shrink. The air warms. A slight breeze passes through the door curtain, carrying in the scent of fermenting wine and street dust. It's time for the ritual, one that repeats every day, unchanged and uncelebrated, getting ready. Cosmetics were not just adornment in ancient Rome, they were survival tools. Here, appearances meant everything, even when they changed nothing. The women of the brothel move without instruction. They've done this before, countless times. Each reaches for her small collection of tools. Pots of pigment, faded cloths, bone or bronze sticks for mixing, and polished shards of bronze to catch glimpses of themselves. They're not striving for beauty in the way we often understand it today. They're applying masks, protective, performative, and toxic, quite literally. The white foundation many use is called cerussa, a mixture of vinegar and white lead. It clings to the skin, creates a ghostly pale tone, and with enough layers, gives the illusion of wealth or refinement. Never mind that prolonged use could cause hair loss, chronic fatigue, or death. They press the powder into place with small pads or fingers. No mirrors needed. They know this part by touch. Then comes the rouge, red ochre or crushed mulberries for the cheeks, and sometimes the lips. Eyes are rimmed with charcoal or soot, applied with tiny sticks dipped in oil. Eyebrows are shaped, darkened with ash or ant ink paste. Even lashes get attention. The effect is dramatic, bold, and deliberately artificial. In Roman culture, modesty and natural appearance were praised in public, but in the lupanar, exaggeration was the rule. The louder the makeup, the clearer the woman's role. This wasn't vanity, it was code. Some women go further. A wig, usually dyed red or blonde, is set atop cropped or shaved heads. These wigs were often made from the hair of enslaved people from Germany or Gaul, lighter hair being exotic and alluring to Roman tastes. The irony doesn't go unnoticed by anyone who works here. There's even perfume, if it's available, a blend of cinnamon, myrrh, and burnt resin stored in a tiny alabaster vial. Just a dab at the wrists or behind the ears, enough to suggest softness in a world of stone beds and rough hands. You notice one woman, older than the others, pressing kohl into the corners of her eyes with slow, deliberate movements. Her hands are cracked, her knuckles bruised. Still, her eyes gleam with a steady, practiced resolve. She doesn't look in the mirror. She doesn't need to. Mainstream accounts of Roman life often gloss over this cosmetic preparation, painting it as mere decoration. But here, it's strategic. Every painted line says, "I'm ready, I'm protected, I'm someone else for now." Historians still debate whether these beautification rituals were imposed by brothel owners or adopted by the women themselves as a means of control. Did they choose to paint their faces to feel powerful, or were they painted to be palatable? And yet, amid the routine, you spot something surprising. One woman pulls out a tiny bronze box from beneath her bedding. Inside is a sliver of blue glass. She positions it on her lap, careful not to drop it. It's her mirror. Not polished metal, not broken pottery, actual glass. Rare, valuable, likely stolen or gifted by someone trying to impress. She gazes at her reflection for a long moment, adjusts her lip color, then quietly tucks the glass away again. There's a strange power in these tools, even knowing they're dangerous, even knowing they mask more than they reveal. In the corner of the main hall, the madam has laid out a handful of accessories. Bracelets made of painted bone, a copper brooch, a pair of worn sandals with thin leather straps. These are the good items, passed around between the women like lucky charms or audition props. A fringe detail most don't know. Roman prostitutes often adopted pseudonyms, stage names, essentially. Lupa, Felicia, Daphne. Names that hinted at sensuality, beauty, or mythical appeal. These weren't legal aliases. They were protective masks for daily use. Most clients never learned their real names. That was the point. And so the transformation continues. Laughter rises now and then, dry, ironic, shared between women who know how absurd it all is. A cracked joke about looking like a Vestal virgin. A comment about the lead makeup being stronger than Roman cement. The atmosphere shifts slightly as more sunlight spills in. The day is warming. The perfume sharpens in the air. The frescoes on the walls gleam faintly with sweat and lamp soot. From outside, voices grow louder. Men are approaching. Not clients yet, just loiterers. Curious glances, half-hearted interest. Still, the women straighten up. A breeze lifts one woman's curtain and flutters it wide open. She doesn't move to close it. Not yet. The presentation is part of the job. She stands framed in the dim doorway, backlit like a living silhouette from the fresco behind her. To the casual passerby, it's just another doorway, another woman, another face with painted lips and eyes that never blink first. But you see more now. You see the preparation that went into that silent pose, the layers of powder, the discomfort hidden beneath rouge, the costume that hurts the wearer even as it protects her. She shifts her weight, lowers her gaze, waits, and behind her, another girl finishes tying the red ribbon around her waist, the only splash of true color she owns. The brothel is ready. It's mid-morning now, and the street outside hums with movement. Vendors shout over one another, hawking everything from garum sauce to goat cheese. Slaves haul jugs of wine down the narrow lanes. Somewhere not far off, a donkey brays like it's in on a joke no one else hears. And inside the lupanar, just off the main street, a quiet kind of waiting begins. The women have taken their places. Some lean in doorways. Some perch just behind their curtains. Others sit idle with practiced ease, eyes alert, posture inviting. They're made up, polished, and posed. But there's something deeply ordinary about this part of the day. It's not glamour, it's repetition. And while the customers may still be deciding how to spend their coin, the workers have already calculated the day's costs. Now comes the part people rarely imagine, the waiting. Waiting for footsteps, for eye contact, for the raised eyebrow of interest. It's an invisible kind of labor, one that requires poise, stillness, and a willingness to let others choose your fate, hour by hour. In the meantime, there's breakfast, or what passes for it. You glance toward a chipped clay bowl near the main chamber. It's communal, not personal. A half loaf of hard barley bread sits inside, rough and cracked around the edges. A few black olives roll around the bottom, wrinkled but edible. The wine has already been watered down, not out of concern for moderation, but to stretch what little is left. Food in brothels was usually provided by the madam or brothel owner, and it was rarely generous. The goal wasn't nourishment, it was maintenance, enough to keep the women functioning, alert and obedient, not enough to give anyone energy to resist the system. One woman tears her piece of bread quietly and soaks it in the wine. The olive pits pile up beside her. Another girl sucks on the pith of a lemon peel, hoping to dull a sour stomach. Nobody complains aloud. Complaint doesn't change anything. Mainstream historical texts often skip over what prostitutes actually ate. There's this idea that their days were full of lust, scandal, and money. But hunger, mundane, gnawing hunger, was a constant backdrop. Historians still argue whether the brothels included food and shelter as part of a woman's wage, or if meals were taken out of their earnings. Most agree, few left with full pockets or full bellies. A particularly quirky practice noted by some Roman satirists. Some women would keep a bit of fennel root tucked in their cheek throughout the day, not just to freshen breath, but to curb appetite. Even minor luxuries like honey or dried figs were reserved for special clients or festive days, never for the workers themselves. You hear footsteps again, this time slower, louder. A man peers in. He's alone, dressed in the usual tunic, nothing grand, probably a laborer. He looks from one curtain to another. One of the women leans slightly forward, not enough to seem desperate, just enough to show she's available. He moves toward her, and she nods, once. They disappear behind the curtain. Another transaction begins. The rest of the room returns to stillness. It's strange, the way time stretches here. Outside, the city pulses with events. Markets opening, trials held in the basilica, children running to school. But inside the brothel, time dilates. Minutes feel like hours. The only clocks are footsteps and curtain shifts. Someone giggles. A joke is shared in low tones. Humor when it comes, is always dry and fast, like wine thrown down the throat to kill a bitter taste. And yet there's solidarity here, not sisterhood exactly, too many rivalries for that, but a kind of shared language. Nods, glances, rolled eyes, raised eyebrows. The subtle communication of people who live in the same machinery and know where the cogs tend to jam. A small child peeks through the curtain. A runner, likely, those young slaves who deliver notes and messages. He drops off a basket near the madam, avoids eye contact, and dashes off. Inside the basket, a folded tunic, some coins, a bundle of dried herbs. A message from a regular, perhaps, or a madam's bribe. The line between business and private lives here is blurry, if it exists at all. You shift your attention to the women again. One chews slowly, staring blankly at the wall fresco in front of her. It shows a reclining man and two women, painted in bright mineral pigments, frozen in an impossible pose. She's likely seen it every day for months, maybe years, and no longer really sees it at all. That's the strange thing about brothels in ancient Rome. They were simultaneously invisible and hypervisible, tolerated but disdained, decorated like temples but treated like gutters. And so the morning drifts on. Every few minutes, footsteps approach. Sometimes a curtain moves, sometimes it doesn't. The madam watches everything, lips tight, eyes quick. She's not cruel necessarily, but efficient, detached. She counts coin and watches for loiterers, especially those who waste time without paying. You begin to realize the contradiction. These women are commodities, yes, but they're also professionals. They track regulars, read moods, guess at coins from a glance. They remember names, preferences, arguments. They sense trouble before it walks in. One woman begins wiping down the threshold of her room, not out of cleanliness, but habit. Presentation matters, even when your customers forget your face by morning. Outside, the sun is now high enough to cast stark shadows across the brothel's stone steps. The noise of the city increases, but inside, it's still a quiet choreography of waiting, preparing, and surviving. Another day in a life measured in olives, footsteps, and short glances. Outside, the heat begins to settle onto the narrow alley like a second skin. You can see it shimmering in the air just above the stone pavement, waves of warmth rising from the ground like steam from a hidden kitchen. Inside the brothel, the light is dim but persistent, sneaking through the gaps in the curtain and slashing golden stripes across the worn walls. This is the slow part of the day, but it's also a crucial one. The women take their places near the entrances of their small rooms, or even just inside the front corridor, adjusting their posture to look both relaxed and alert. Their makeup is still fresh, their tunics arranged just enough to invite curiosity without making the first move. This is a kind of theater, not a seduction exactly, but a performance of availability. And this really is the job: waiting, posing, surviving. Some choose to sit in doorways with one leg drawn up, idly playing with a hair ribbon or coin. Others lean against the stone wall beside their assigned room, offering small smiles or gestures to the occasional passerby. They don't speak much now. The waiting has its own rhythm. Words would only slow it. There's a term for this part of the routine: captatio, literally capturing. It wasn't just about standing there. It was about attracting the eye without chasing it. You didn't shout at men. You caught them, gently, visually from behind your curtain or post. And there were plenty to catch. The street outside is known for its entertainments. Taverns, gambling halls, bakeries, everything within arm's reach. Men come stumbling out of wine shops with heavy laughter and light coin purses. They aren't just locals. Pompeii is a port city, and sailors, traders, and travelers arrive daily. The brothel sits like a spider in the middle of the web, and everyone eventually wanders too close. One man, clearly hungover, leans against the building, glancing sideways through the doorway. A younger man follows, maybe a friend or a client in training. He lingers too long. One of the women meets his gaze, cocks her head slightly. He flushes red and walks on. It's not his time, yet. Historians have always been fascinated by how Roman society tolerated and even encouraged prostitution while shaming those who practiced it. It was a cultural double standard with legal teeth. Men who visited brothels were rarely judged, but the women, always, were marked, literally and socially. One thing few people realize: brothel workers often weren't allowed to wear the stola, the long robe associated with Roman citizenship and virtue. Instead, they were expected to dress in shorter tunics, sometimes dyed or adorned, but unmistakably informal. The contrast wasn't just aesthetic, it was legal. A woman in a stola was protected by Roman moral law. A woman in a brothel was not. Even the way she stood told the public what she was. Respectable women were rarely seen loitering or leaning in public. To do so invited judgment. For these women, being still and visible wasn't just tolerated, it was demanded. You watch one woman shift her weight slightly. She adjusts her tunic over one shoulder, exposes a bit more collarbone. It's calculated, subtle, a silent invitation. To us. This time, it works. A man approaches. He's older, dressed in a well-kept toga. A merchant, maybe. His hands are ink-stained, probably from keeping his own account books. He walks with the entitlement of someone used to giving orders. He doesn't speak at first, just stands in front of her. She stands too, now, mirrors his posture. There's a quiet pause. Then he gestures. She parts the curtain. He enters. She follows. The curtain swings closed behind them. One client, one transaction. 15 minutes? 20? That's the visible part, the public part. And while that curtain offers some visual privacy, the walls are thin. You can still hear the shuffle of sandals, the creak of the stone bed, the rhythm of familiarity rather than intimacy. It's also practiced, polite almost, and then quiet again. Mainstream run texts rarely talk about this with honesty. They offer satire or idealized fantasies, but the mechanics of daily life, the mundane rhythm of these brief encounters, are often ignored, not because they weren't known, but because they were too ordinary to dignify, too uncomfortable to admit. Historians still argue whether these brothels operated under strict schedules or informal rotations. Some say women had quotas to meet. Others believe it depended on the madam's whim or the clientele flow. Either way, there was no real downtime, only gaps between transactions. And in those gaps, the posing begins again. There's a fringe belief, shared by some scholars, that women would mark successful days by tying knots in a belt or string hidden beneath their tunic. One knot per client, not for pride, but to track debt, earnings, or perhaps just to know how much of themselves was spent. Back in the corridor, another curtain flutters. A different client emerges. He offers no farewell, just tosses a coin onto the small stool near the door and steps into the sunlight. The woman follows shortly after, smoothing her tunic, wiping her brow. She doesn't check the coin. Not yet. and outside more footsteps echo. The midday sun climbs higher. The waiting resumes. The curtain lifts once more. It's late morning now, and the heat is seeping in like a slow tide. The stone walls of the lupanar hold warmth long after the sun has moved on, creating a dry, almost suffocating atmosphere. The oil lamps are mostly extinguished. The natural light is enough, but their scent lingers, a mix of burned fat, smoky wicks, and something vaguely metallic. The curtain sways again. A client emerges, brushing dust off his tunic like he's just left a tavern instead of someone's body. His sandals scuff against the floor. He doesn't say a word, doesn't look back, and inside, another man steps forward. He doesn't knock, doesn't ask. He's already chosen who he wants, maybe from a glimpse earlier or from previous visits. He gestures toward a woman waiting at the doorway, and she nods, not smiling, but not resisting either. This is what a typical appointment looks like. No small talk, no greetings, no exchange of names. It's all understood. He enters the small room where the stone bed waits with its scratchy blanket and its low ceiling. The woman follows and pulls the curtain closed behind them. There's no lock, no way to ensure privacy, only a thin barrier of fabric and the unwritten agreement that the moment is temporary. Inside, there's not much space, maybe enough to stand beside the bed. Maybe not. The man doesn't undress completely, just hikes up his tunic. She's done this before, maybe 10 times already this week, probably more. And outside, another woman sits on her haunches, picking at a crack in the floor tiles with a nail. She doesn't look toward the curtained room. Doesn't need to. Mainstream accounts from ancient sources, particularly satirists like Juvenal and Martial, often paint these interactions as outrageous or indulgent, lurid scenes full of perversion and spectacle. But the reality for most working women was not indulgent. It was transactional, repetitive, and blunt. Even the term meretrix, used to describe a registered prostitute, literally means earner. These women were not expected to enjoy or even speak during their encounters. Their role was economic, not emotional, and it shows. The man grunts. The woman barely shifts. The stone bed creaks beneath the weight of their coordination. There's nothing seductive about it. No candles, no laughter, only efficiency. The curtain ripples slightly from the air, and then it stills. And yet even here, there are differences in how these exchanges unfold. Some men come in with silence. Others talk too much, bragging or confessing things no one asked to hear. A few bring small gifts, fruit, perfume, sometimes a coin slipped discreetly under the straw mattress as a token of gratitude. Most don't. There's a fringe detail whispered among Roman scholars. Some brothel workers were known to give themselves roles or characters, depending on the client. A goddess for one, a grieving widow for another. Not because it mattered to them, but because variety brought return customers. The curtain opens again. The woman steps out, smoothing her hair. Her face is unreadable, not numb, just closed, like a shop window in the rain. The man exits without looking at anyone. He hands a coin to the madam, or drops it onto a small ceramic plate near the entry, if no one's standing guard. It's worth noting that coins from this era, bronze asses or silver denarii, often depicted emperors or deities. The irony of paying for human intimacy with a stamped image of Augustus or Mars isn't lost on many observers today. Historians still argue whether Roman clients viewed the women as individuals or commodities. Some evidence suggests repeat customers developed odd senses of ownership, bringing gifts or expecting loyalty. Others never learned a single name. And what happens to the money? That depends. If the woman is enslaved, and many were, the madam keeps it. The worker may never even see it. If she's free, but contracted, she might get a small percentage. In rare cases, women negotiated their own rates and kept most of the coin, but this was uncommon and often required protection from powerful patrons. You hear a soft exhale from one of the nearby rooms. A woman leans forward and rests her elbows on her knees. She wipes her brow with the edge of her tunic, doesn't say a word. The curtain next to her stirs again. Another client, another gesture, another repetition. From the outside, a curious observer might think brothel life is non-stop debauchery. But the truth is far more mundane. It's a procession of nameless encounters, like clockwork, one after the next, each one blending into the one before it. And yet, this isn't a lifeless place. There's subtle movement, shared glances, moments of humor. A girl passes a piece of stale bread to another with mock ceremony, pretending it's a royal gift. They both suppress grins. One sticks out her tongue in silent rebellion. It's small, but it's resistance. They find ways to exist beyond the role, even if only for a second. Back in the front corridor, the sun shifts again, casting sharp shadows from the ceiling beams. Another curtain lifts, another man enters, another woman rises, and still the rhythm continues, quiet, relentless, and unchanged. By midday, the lupanar grows hotter, stuffier, the air thickens. The scent of sweat and oil and crushed sandalwood clings to everything: curtains, tunics, skin. Outside, the market street blazes with noise and sun. But inside the brothel, the mood shifts again. There's a knock, not at a curtain, but at the front. It's brisk, official. The woman nearest the door tenses slightly. She's already halfway to standing when the curtain lifts and a man enters, not a customer, but something worse. The tax man, or more precisely, a publicanus, a private tax collector contracted by the Roman state. These men were not government employees, but rather entrepreneurs of bureaucracy. They purchased the rights to collect taxes from certain regions or trades, and Roman prostitution was one of them. Yes, even here, in the back alleys of Pompeii, intimacy was subject to taxation. The tax collector carries a wax tablet and a stylus. His sandals are dusty. His tunic is neat but sweat-stained around the collar. He doesn't make small talk. He rarely needs to. Each woman in the brothel who is registered as a meretrix, a legal sex worker, owes a fixed fee. In cities like Pompeii or Rome, this could be paid monthly or annually, depending on arrangement. The amount varied, but it was typically steep enough to keep women constantly working. And it wasn't just the madam who paid. Even independent prostitutes, those rare few working without brothel oversight, had to register, disclose their stage name, and file taxes like any other trade. Their names and information were entered into official registries, public ones. Let that settle in. In ancient Rome, there was a list, a literal, searchable record of who was registered to sell sex and where. Historians still debate the exact mechanism of these registries. Were they kept in the Temple of Venus, in the forum offices, on stone or scrolls? The only thing scholars agree on is that they existed and were used not to protect the women, but to monitor them. You watch as the taxman makes his rounds. He speaks briefly to the madam, then to each woman. They confirm their name, or rather, their lupinar alias. Some nod without looking up. Others murmur their line like they're reciting a bad poem. And then the stylist scratches. He presses into the wax, recording amounts. Names, room numbers, one by one, the list is filled. There's no privacy here, no confidentiality, and absolutely no negotiating. Coins are passed over, bronze asses mostly, the lower denominations. You hear them clink together in a small leather pouch. Some women pay from their own supply. Others glance helplessly at the madam, who wordlessly hands over their owed tax from the house's earnings. That debt will be remembered and added. This was the legal part of Roman sex work. You were allowed to do it, as long as you paid to be shamed. The tax itself was known as the vectigal, a special tax for prostitutes and pimps, often grouped in the same category as tavern owners and entertainers. In some provinces, the vectigal was based on earnings. In others, it was a flat fee, paid whether or not you'd had a single customer, and failure to pay, that meant penalties, fines, legal trouble, in extreme cases, arrest or forced labor. A fringe tidbit from a few surviving inscriptions. In some cities, women who couldn't pay their tax would temporarily mortgage their clothing or jewelry. There are records of gold earrings and ivory combs held as collateral against their own right to work. The tax collector moves to one of the younger women. She hesitates slightly, fingers fumbling at her coin pouch. He waits, stone-faced. The madam steps in and covers the difference. The girl exhales, but her debt has just deepened. This moment, brief, impersonal, is where the realities of Roman sex work crystallize. The state doesn't care if the work is dangerous or degrading. It only cares that it's taxable. And this woman, she'll now need at least 2 more clients today, just to make back what she's handed over. The collector doesn't linger. He checks the final marks on his wax tablet, nods once, and disappears through the curtain. The echo of his sandals on stone fades quickly. For a moment, the brothel is silent. The kind of silence that follows held breath. And then, like always, the rhythm resumes. One woman mutters something sarcastic under her breath. Another snorts, and they both crack brief smiles. Jokes are the only antidote to math. Historians still argue about whether the Roman taxation system for prostitutes was more about revenue or control. Did the state want money or obedience? Evidence suggests both. The visibility of registration was a tool. Pay the tax and accept the shame, or refuse and become a criminal. The irony, of course, is that many Roman men, including lawmakers, were frequent clients of the very women they labeled as morally inferior. You notice the madam rubbing her temples now, eyes closed. She'll need to recalculate the house totals, adjust for shortfalls, reassign debts. There's no rest here. Even the numbers are exhausting. In the back, one woman takes a seat, pulls her knees to her chest. She says nothing. She doesn't need to. The taxman's visit happens often enough to not be a surprise, but never often enough to feel normal. And outside, the street noise continues. The Roman Empire marches on, and inside this quiet, overheated brothel, the cost of survival is carefully recorded in wax. With the taxman gone and the midday sun now fully overhead, a strange stillness settles over the lupinar. It's not restful, it's the pause between storms. Inside the cramped rooms and dusty corridors, the women retreat briefly from the doorway perches. The air is thick, heavy with heat, but even thicker with tension that never quite breaks. This is when the quieter side of the brothel stirs, not with clients, but with whispers. Between transactions and under the noise of daily survival, the women talk. Gossip flows here not for fun, but for function. Who paid well? Who didn't? Which client gets too rough? Who promised gifts they never delivered? Who might have a connection? A freedman with influence, a soldier with soft spots, a merchant with regular business in town. This whispering web keeps the women informed, alive, and one step ahead of the risks they can't entirely avoid. But talk isn't all they share. This time of day is also when they exchange something even more critical: survival strategies. One woman pulls a dried bundle of herbs from beneath her bed. She crumbles the leaves into a ceramic bowl and pours a splash of vinegar over it. She's making a wash, not for refreshment, but for prevention. Another nods in approval. She's used it too. In brothels like this one, there were no physicians on call, no clean clinics. What passed for sexual health was a chaotic mix of folk remedies, herbal brews, and dangerous experimentation. Women here learned through trial, error, and rumor. Some carried sponge-soaked pessaries, soaked in honey or vinegar, believed to ward off pregnancy. Others swore by more exotic mixtures: pomegranate skins, myrrh, or ground acacia seeds. These were used not just for contraception, but as makeshift protection from infection. And then there were the extreme measures. A few women talk in hushed tones about remedies involving lead filings or even animal dung. One girl once tried crocodile dung, dried and shaped into a paste, inserted as a barrier. She doesn't recommend it. The smell alone nearly cleared the entire room. This sounds outrageous now, but the desperation was real. Historians today still debate how much these treatments actually worked. Some ingredients, like acacia and myrrh, may have had mild antiseptic properties. Others were outright harmful, but when the choice was that or nothing, women took the risk. There's an odd camaraderie in this exchange of secrets. The laughter is dry, the tone matter-of-fact. But beneath it all, there's something resembling solidarity. Each woman knows the cost of being unprepared, and each one knows that if she falls ill, she might not be able to work, and if she can't work, she might not eat. One woman mentions a client who gave her a strange coin, shaped differently, probably from the East. Another woman interrupts. Don't accept those again. Some won't exchange. Another murmurs about a woman down the road who stopped bleeding after a harsh treatment, hasn't worked in weeks. They all fall quiet for a moment. A nearby wall is scratched with tally marks, uneven, messy. Not artistic, just carved lines in plaster. Some say they're for keeping count. Others think they're prayers or warnings. There's a quirky detail worth noting here. Some brothels kept small shrines or household gods hidden in back corners, known as lairs. These weren't temple-level deities, just simple, familiar protectors of the home. Even in a place considered morally unclean, these figures were respected. Offerings of oil or crumbs were sometimes left in chipped bowls, alongside whispered hopes. Even the women who no longer believed in much at all still nodded toward the corner before beginning their day. Religion here didn't feel holy. It felt practical, like a superstition you couldn't afford to ignore. The conversation shifts now towards something darker: pregnancy, or, more often, how to prevent it. One woman speaks of a midwife she once knew, hidden deep in the city, only contacted through referrals. She performed procedures for girls who couldn't afford a child. The price was steep. the risk steeper. And if the child came anyway, that was another silence altogether. Roman society, for all its grandeur, had little room for the unwanted. Infants born in brothels were rarely kept. Some were abandoned, left at designated places where others might claim them, a practice known as expositio. Others simply disappeared. The records don't say how. Historians still argue whether brothel-born children were ever accepted into society. Some may have been taken in as household slaves or raised by wet nurses, but most, they fade from history. Back in the corridor, the gossip lightens again. Someone makes a joke about a client with an odd tattoo. Another woman laughs at the memory of a man who fell asleep mid-visit, snoring into her shoulder. It's strange, this rhythm. One moment grim, the next ridiculous. That's how the women stay afloat. The conversation is their pressure valve, their lifeline. It's worth remembering, these weren't voiceless, vacant figures. They knew each other's stories, quirks, tricks. They shared clothes, shared secrets, shared nightmares. You hear a low humming now, one of the women singing softly to herself as she sharpens a comb on the stone windowsill. Her tune is unfamiliar, maybe something from another province, maybe from a life before this one. Someone else picks up the refrain, barely audible. It fades quickly, but it's there. Just another part of the language these women speak, a language built from necessity, pain, and a thread of defiance that not even the law could erase. Outside, the sun begins to angle west. The shadows lengthen across the corridor floor, and the quiet hum of whispers carries on. The air outside thickens with the afternoon heat, pushing the scent of sun-warmed dust and spilled wine into every open doorway. Back inside the brothel, things feel slower, but never still. Business doesn't stop. It only changes shape. The curtain lifts. He's not a laborer, not a traveler, and certainly not a soldier. You can tell by the way he enters, slow, deliberate, like someone who doesn't have to be anywhere quickly. His toga is draped just a little too perfectly. His sandals are clean, not scuffed. His hair is oiled, and his skin lightly perfumed. A senator? Probably not. At least, not one who wants to be identified. But he's someone with status. A local magistrate, a wealthy merchant, maybe even a visiting official. Whoever he is, he has the look of someone who enjoys breaking rules, especially the ones he helped write. Men like this rarely use their real names. They appear under cover of dusk, or late in the quiet midday when the streets empty out and no one's looking too closely. They act like they don't recognize anyone, even if they've been here 3 times this week. They avert their eyes in public, but in private, they make demands, sometimes apologies, sometimes promises. He chooses quickly. The woman he gestures toward barely reacts. She's worked here long enough to recognize the look of a man who wants to forget where he is and forget that he's being watched because he is being watched. Maybe not by guards or wives or rivals, but by the system. And he knows it. Roman society thrived on appearances. Reputation mattered. Dignitas, the public weight of honor, had to be carefully curated. A man could gamble, drink, even cheat on his wife, so long as he kept it discreet. But being seen entering a brothel, that could cost him an election, a marriage, or his standing at the next Senate vote. That's why men like this come veiled in silence and secrecy, and why the women pretend, flawlessly, to not know who they are. Mainstream Roman historians, especially those from the upper class, wrote about this duality often. Satirists like Juvenal mocked hypocritical senators who railed against immorality in public while privately visiting the very women they condemned. Yet even those critiques were more comedy than justice. The double standard never really broke. Historians still argue whether such men protected the brothels they frequented or exploited them more ruthlessly. Some evidence suggests regular clients of status may have offered favors, reduced taxes, leniency with local laws. Others believe that these men used their positions to avoid consequences entirely. Whatever the truth, one thing's clear. The law bent differently depending on the toga. Inside the small room, the woman pours a little water into a bowl and dabs it on her temples. The gesture is practical. It cools the skin, but also symbolic. A small reset before dealing with a man who expects both discretion and illusion. He talks a little, not about politics, of course. That would be dangerous, but about himself, his travels, his stress, how little his wife understands him. The woman listens, not because she's interested, but because listening makes him tip better. There's a fringe detail from Roman brothel graffiti worth sharing here. Etched near the entrance of a lupanar in Pompeii are phrases like, Felicia was here with the magistrate, or Lucius paid twice and left crying. Whether true or not, these tiny inscriptions acted as secret records, jokes, or warnings, and sometimes as leverage, because in this world, information was as valuable as coin. The woman touches the man's arm gently, guides him toward the bed. She's done this before. He'll probably talk more afterward, or fall asleep, or ask her if she remembers his name. She does, but she'll pretend otherwise. It's part of the performance. And make no mistake, this is a performance. Every gesture, every pause, every sigh, calculated. These aren't moments of real intimacy. They're choreography, carefully adjusted for each patron's fantasy. And men of status often wanted to be reminded of their power, even when pretending to relinquish it. She finishes quickly. He lingers a little too long, tucking his tunic in place and asking vague questions about whether she'll be here tomorrow. She smiles without answering. He drops 2 coins on the bench, silver, not bronze, generous. Then he glances both ways and slips out the curtain like a shadow. She exhales deeply, not relief, not regret, just release. Roman prostitutes developed an internal map of who could be trusted, who paid well, and who wasn't worth the effort. The regulars were ranked not by charm, but by consistency. And those in togas? Always high maintenance. Still, their visits came with perks. Better tips, longer rest between clients. Sometimes even a hot meal if they were feeling particularly generous or guilty. But the downside, secrets are heavy, and they always cost more than they're worth. You notice one of the younger women sketching a shape in the dust with her toe, a crude symbol of a balance scale. Justice, maybe, or just a joke. Either way, no one laughs. In the corner, another woman folds a piece of cloth and ties it around her wrist. Not for decoration, but as a reminder. One knot for every client she doesn't talk about. Today, that's 4. Outside, the shadows stretch longer now, creeping across the cobblestones like fingers reaching into the doorways. Another visitor passes by, then another. No one looks in. But the brothel waits. As always, the curtain settles, the room quiets, and the performance begins again. By mid-afternoon, the heat has sunk into everything. The stone walls radiated back like a low, steady breath. Even the flickering oil lamps, usually more symbolic than necessary during the day, feel heavier in the stagnant air. No one moves quickly now, not the clients, not the workers, not the flies that circle the wine bowl near the door. This is the closest thing to rest anyone in the Lupinar gets. It's not a scheduled break. There's no lunch bell, no private courtyard where the women can stretch their legs and exhale. Instead, they find slivers of shade, patches of silence, or corners where the stone feels cool enough to lean against. One woman sits on the floor, back pressed to the wall, knees drawn up. She's pulled the corner of her tunic up over her shoulder, not for modesty, but to shield herself from the heat pouring in through a crack in the roof tiles. Another lies stretched out on her stone bed, eyes closed, not asleep, but not fully present either. It's a posture of preservation, not rest. There's a soft thud. Someone drops a sandal while rubbing her feet. Another picks absent-mindedly at the seam of her curtain. The brothel has gone quiet, except for the faint sound of city life beyond the doorway, the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer, a mule braying, a child calling for their mother. For a few brief moments, no one is calling anyone's name here. This pause, the non-break, is essential. It's a mental checkpoint, the part of the day when the masks can slip just slightly. Not off, never fully off, but loosened. You might imagine that the women take this time to talk or plan, but more often they withdraw into themselves. There's an emotional economy here. Words are saved for when they're profitable. Energy is hoarded. Still, a few quiet exchanges unfold. Someone offers a piece of dried fig. Another passes a damp cloth to dab on the neck. One girl mumbles a half-remembered poem. It's bad. The others smirk. One repeats a line under her breath just for rhythm. Then silence again. Mainstream Roman sources say little about these in-between moments. They focus on transactions, on clients, on scandal. But what's often lost is the sheer volume of waiting in a brothel. More time was spent between visits than during them, and the women weren't lounging in silk. They were coping in shadows, pressed against warm walls, trying not to overheat, overthink, or overstep. Historians still argue whether Roman brothels operated on a strict shift system or a more fluid, chaotic rhythm. Some believe the madam assigned times, managing the flow of clients like a tavern owner manages drunks. Others argue that the women worked on an opportunistic basis. Whoever caught the next man's eye earned the next coin. Either way, the result is the same. There's no guaranteed rest. You pause only when no one is asking for you. A fringe detail from archaeological digs in Pompeii. Some brothel walls have tiny holes, pinpricks carved through from one room to another. Not for spying, necessarily, but perhaps for listening, or just knowing someone was nearby. Even when words weren't exchanged, presence mattered. It still does. One woman rubs her temple with resin oil. It's meant to cool the skin and clear the mind. Another lifts her tunic just slightly to scratch at a persistent rash, carefully, discreetly. She glances around to make sure the madam doesn't see. These moments aren't dignified, but they're deeply human. It's easy to imagine Roman brothels as loud, frantic places, but the truth is far more complex. They existed in a cycle of intense activity, followed by exhausted stillness. Just like now, the madam herself is silent. She's perched on a stool near the entrance, eyes half-lidded, lips pursed. You can tell she's calculating something in her mind. Earnings, maybe. Or which woman to send out onto the street to drum up more business if the slow hour continues. But for now, she lets the lull breathe. One of the younger girls curls up on her side, eyes fluttering shut. Not sleeping, not quite, but slipping into that space between exhaustion and vigilance. You can never truly sleep here, not deeply, not safely, because at any moment the rhythm might snap back into motion. You begin to hear it now, a pair of sandals scraping against stone outside, laughter from two men turning the corner, the telltale pause of footsteps hesitating just beyond the doorway. Inside, postures change. Legs are uncrossed, eyes open, a tunic is adjusted. The women don't rush, but the quiet vanishes. This is how survival works in places like this. The pause is always temporary. You might lean your head against the wall for 5 minutes, but when the next client arrives, you straighten up like you were never tired at all. The curtain stirs, another face appears, and just like that, rest is over. The afternoon wears on. Shadows stretch longer across the alleyways, and the golden light of the descending sun cuts at sharper angles through the open doorway of the lupanar. The air outside is still hot, but there's a softness creeping into it, a hint of evening to come. And then there's a flicker of excitement, just barely noticeable. A man walks in with a bit more flair than usual, broad shoulders, tanned skin, a trace of blood on his knuckles, and dust on his sandals. A gladiator, not the first to enter these walls, and certainly not the last, but always a presence that makes the brothel buzz in a different way. He's younger than expected, no more than 20 probably. Strong, yes, but his face still has that unfinished look of someone who's lived fast and hasn't yet learned to flinch. He smiles at the madam like he owns the place, and for a moment, it feels like he might. The women glance up, just briefly, but it's enough. There's a ripple of movement, a sudden awareness, not competition exactly, more like curiosity. Who will he choose? He doesn't take long. He gestures toward a woman near the far wall, one with a faded scar above her eyebrow and a smirk that's seen better stories. She rises without a word and disappears with him behind her curtain. Mainstream Roman literature loves the image of the gladiator as a sex symbol, powerful, dangerous, desired. The public adored them. The private visits, though, less poetry, more politics. For many women, a gladiator was both thrilling and risky. On the one hand, he might tip well, boast generously, or even offer protection. On the other hand, he might be injured, drunk, or carrying scars too fresh to forget. Still, his fame carried weight. A visit from someone like him could raise a girl's status, at least among her peers. There's a fringe anecdote told among Roman graffiti enthusiasts. In Pompeii, a wall scrawl reads, "Salatus the Thracian makes all the girls sigh." It's half joke, half reputation. Whether Salatus existed or not, the idea of the celebrated gladiator as both killer and lover stuck fast in Roman culture. Behind the curtain, there's no whispering, no giggles, just the low murmur of a voice, his, and the sound of leather armor being set aside. Carefully, respectfully. She doesn't act starstruck. She's seen this kind before. His type can break bones and make promises in the same breath. And yet, there's something different in the energy. Not tenderness, but attention. He watches her, listens when she gives instruction, doesn't rush. Maybe it's because gladiators understand bodies, how easily they can break. Historians still debate whether brothel visits were officially allowed for gladiators during active service. Some believe their lenestae, trainers or owners, discouraged visits that might distract or weaken them before matches. Others argue that allowing it helped control aggression and tension. Either way, most fighters found a way in when they wanted to. And yes, sometimes they return. Back in the corridor, the other women resume their routines. One picks up a lost coin from the floor. Another adjusts a curtain, but there's still a bit of electricity in the air. Even if they don't admit it, a visit from a famous client can shift the mood. It reminds them they are part of a larger social web, one that occasionally brushes up against celebrity. The madam, meanwhile, seems unimpressed. She's seen too many of them. They fight well, but rarely pay on time. 10, maybe 15 minutes pass. The curtain lifts again. He emerges, rebuckling his armor, slower now, with a calm that wasn't there before. He presses a coin into her hand, silver, and winks, just once. She doesn't smile, but her fingers close tightly around the coin. He walks out into the bright street, disappearing around the corner as quickly as he came. And now, of course, the teasing begins. One of the women leans in and toward the one he chose, eyebrows raised. "Well?" she asks. The response is short, polite, smelled like blood and cinnamon. Everyone laughs, softly but real. That's the thing about brothel life. Small shifts break the monotony. A single unusual client, a whispered compliment, a surprise gift. They become legends among the walls. Not because they're especially romantic or rare, but because they offer something different. Stories, if nothing else. Later, the woman who saw the gladiator sits on the edge of her bed, unwrapping the cloth around her wrist where she's kept a few coins. She adds his to the collection. There are more than expected, enough to buy perfume, maybe, or pay down a debt. She leans back against the wall, closes her eyes. She won't tell the others everything, not because she's ashamed, but because a story held privately is sometimes more powerful than one passed around. Outside, the sun is beginning to drop. The day has turned, and with it, the kind of clients who will soon begin to arrive. But for now, the room holds a strange kind of quiet pride. A gladiator came. He chose her, and tomorrow, someone will whisper about it again. The day leans heavily toward the evening now. Light slips in at slanted angles, making long shadows on the walls, catching flecks of dust midair like gold. The air cools, but only slightly. It's still thick with the residue of breath, oil, and quiet endurance. Another curtain lifts. Another man steps out. Another coin hits the table with a metallic thud. But this next visitor isn't dressed like the others. No tunic, no armor. Instead, he wears a simple white robe cinched with a plain rope. His sandals are well worn, and in his hands he holds a small bundle of herbs and a carved wooden symbol, one that marks him as a priest. And just like that, the atmosphere inside the lupanar shifts again. He's not here to judge. He's not here to convert. He's here, as many before him have been, for something else entirely. Ritual. Religious visits to brothels weren't common, but they weren't unheard of either. Roman religion wasn't segregated from daily life. It ran through it, constantly, indiscriminately. And sex in Roman culture wasn't treated as something inherently sinful. In fact, sexuality and divinity were often interwoven. The priest walks slowly, speaking softly in Latin. His words aren't commands, they're offerings. He's reciting something, a hymn to Venus maybe, or a protection charm, some kind of invocation to cleanse or connect, or simply honor. The women don't respond immediately. They've seen this before. The motives vary. One priest might arrive to perform a purification ritual. Another may wish to reenact a symbolic act, a sacred union, a divine embodiment, a fertility rite. Some genuinely believe in the spiritual significance of what they're doing. Others are simply cloaking their desires in the language of the gods. He chooses one of the older women, not arbitrarily, but perhaps out of recognition. She steps forward, not with hesitation, but with practiced calm. This isn't her first time being part of a performance masked as piety. They move into one of the back rooms, one of the cooler ones where the light is lowest. He lays out a few items on the bed, his satchel, a tiny clay idol, and the bundle of dried herbs, rosemary and bay leaf mostly, common symbols of cleansing. Outside the room, the others go quiet, not out of reverence, but curiosity. These visits always blur the line between belief and performance. Mainstream accounts of Roman religion often highlight temples, rituals, festivals, and sacrifices, but they often skip the murkier areas, those rituals performed in private spaces, especially ones involving sex. Yet these existed all over the empire. In certain cults and mystery religions, sex itself was considered sacred, a way of communicating with deities or echoing divine acts. Historians still argue whether these priestly visits were officially sanctioned or simply tolerated. Some temples, like those of Venus, Isis, or Dionysus, were known for their sensual elements. Others kept a firmer line, but in brothels, those boundaries were always a little softer. The curtain flutters again. Behind it, murmurs, low chanting, the burn of incense, frankincense, or maybe myrrh, begins to waft into the hallway. It's not unpleasant. It smells like ceremony, like something being made clean. The women don't mock it, not out loud. Even if the priest's motives are questionable, the ritual offers something unusual, a change of pace, a reminder, however brief, that their work exists in the shadow of something larger, even if that something is as inconsistent as the gods themselves. There's a fringe belief among some scholars that brothel workers occasionally participated in private rituals of their own, not official ceremonies, not priest-led, but shared rites, lighting a small oil lamp for Venus before starting the day, whispering charms into their blankets, offering a drop of wine or a slice of bread to an invisible protector tucked into the crevice of the wall. These weren't acts of blind faith, they were habits. Tools. Comfort. Back inside the room, the priest raises his voice slightly. He's reciting an invocation now, asking for purity, for rebirth, for release. The woman responds, not dramatically, but rhythmically. She knows the words. She's done this before. And perhaps for a moment, it's not performance at all. Perhaps it's a brief bit of theater that feels real because it has to. Religion in Rome was rarely about private, personal belief. It was about action, about doing the thing properly. Say the right words, offer the right gift, make the right gesture, and the gods would take notice. Or, at the very least, leave you alone. The curtain opens again. The priest emerges, face calm, steps deliberate. He hands the woman a coin, not silver, but clean, and bows slightly. She accepts it, nods back, not out of reverence, but out of understanding. He leaves quietly. The madam watches him go, arms folded. She's seen these types before. Some come once, some return weekly. She doesn't interfere either way, as long as they pay. The woman returns to her seat and sits down slowly, rubbing her hands together. Someone asks how it went. She shrugs. At least he wasn't loud. The others smile. Even sacred visits, it turns out, aren't that different from regular ones. And as the incense fades, replaced again by sweat and wine and footsteps, the rhythm of the day resumes. The brothel is a temple of its own, in its own strange way, and the gods, if they do watch, have surely seen worse. Evening has taken its first breath. Outside the lupanar, the light shifts to that muted bronze hue that makes Pompeii's stone buildings glow like cooling embers. The temperature drops just enough to fool you into thinking relief is coming, but inside, the heat clings. The walls are still warm to the touch. The straw on the beds still holds the weight of the day. It's around this hour, when the city begins to dine and drink and drift toward leisure, that discomfort begins to resurface in more intimate ways. Not emotional discomfort, physical, persistent, private. It starts with a scratch, just an itch on the inner thigh or a sting in the lower back. But it grows, spreads. One of the women shifts uncomfortably on her bed, pressing her palm discreetly between her legs. Another rolls her eyes and mutters something about bad wine or bad luck. Everyone knows what she really means. It's a common thread here. Infections, irritations, rashes, and far worse. Despite what the popular frescoes may suggest, Roman brothels were not polished places of sensual indulgence. They were biological minefields. Sanitation was limited to a cold communal basin and maybe a clay pot of vinegar if one was lucky. The rest, up to the body. And often, the body failed. The symptoms were common: itching, burning, swelling, sometimes a discharge with a smell no one dared name aloud. Sometimes sores that cracked open beneath linen and made even walking a painful effort. They went by different names back then: morbus venereus, or more vaguely, shameful afflictions. And still, the work went on. Mainstream Roman medicine did have treatments, but most weren't offered to women like these. Prostitutes didn't have physicians. They had superstition, herbal remedies, and whispered tricks passed down between bedmates. One woman dips a cloth into a jar of wine vinegar mixed with powdered resin. She bites her lip as she applies it. Quickly, roughly. It stings. That's how she knows it's working. Another rubs herself with oil, infused with garlic and rue. It masks symptoms for a time, but never truly cures. Sometimes it makes things worse. A particularly stubborn rash is blamed on a soldier who looked like he hadn't bathed since Germania. Everyone laughs, but behind the humor is a quiet resignation. Historians still argue over which sexually transmitted diseases were most prevalent in the Roman world. Syphilis, for example, likely didn't exist in Europe until centuries later, but chlamydia, gonorrhea, and herpes? All very plausible. Evidence is circumstantial: fragments of text, brief mentions in medical manuals, skeletal remains with bone deformities from untreated infections, but the consensus is clear: disease was rampant. A fringe detail found in Pliny the Elder's Natural History. He recommends a paste made of crushed rose petals and goat gall as a treatment for genital itching. No record survives of whether anyone was desperate enough to try it, but if anyone did, it was probably someone from a place like this. One woman asks another if she's seen the wet nurse yet. That's code. Wet nurses didn't just raise children. They often served as underground medics for women who couldn't afford real doctors. They'd come in secret, bringing ointments, herbs, and midwifery skills. Some brothels allowed them. Others didn't, fearing lost profit from time spent recovering. Meanwhile, the madam pretends not to notice the limps, the groans, the blood on the bedsheets. Unless it affects revenue, it isn't her concern. And the worst part, there's no time off. Infected or not, the next client won't care. And even if he does, He's unlikely to leave without some sort of transaction. So the women adjust. They angle their bodies. They fake pleasure when it hurts. They conceal discomfort behind arched eyebrows and deep sighs. Outside, the evening crowd begins to pick up. Laughter floats in from nearby taverns. A group of young men passes by the entrance, one pausing for just a second before his friend tugs him away. They'll be back later, after a few cups of wine give them courage. Inside, one of the women coughs, deep and dry. It rattles in her chest, and the others glance her way, then quickly look away. They've heard that cough before. It's not from a cold. Someone lights an oil lamp. The smell of heated bronze fills the room, mixing now with vinegar and sweat and incense left over from the priest's visit earlier. In the back corner, a woman takes a piece of charcoal and begins drawing on the wall. Just lines at first. Then a shape, a fish, maybe a god, maybe just something to focus on. She scratches at her elbow as she draws. Another infection, another itch. She doesn't complain. Complaining doesn't cure anything. What it does, though, sometimes, is spark a story. Someone mentions a healer in Herculaneum who charges in advance but guarantees miracles. Another rolls her eyes. Guaranteed miracles are the first sign of a con. Still, hope is passed around like water in a drought. Some of them believe they'll find something that works. Others just believe they'll last long enough that it won't matter. And so, even while itching, hurting, burning, they endure. They prepare for the next curtain to part, the next man to walk in, the next performance to begin. Because pain here isn't exceptional. It's just part of the schedule. Evening sharpens now. The sky outside shifts from bronze to indigo, and the street lamps, oil pots atop crooked stands, are being lit one by one. You can hear the clack of wooden sandals, the chatter of drunk men returning from the taverns, and the creak of carts rattling down uneven stone. Inside the lupanar, the light has changed too, turning everything amber and shadowed. And then shouting. Not from a client, not from a drunk. This sound is sharper, colder. A command barked in Latin by someone who expects to be obeyed. The footsteps that follow are heavier. Boots, not sandals. 2 Roman officers appear in the doorway, followed by a young clerk carrying a wax tablet. The room stiffens instantly. Every woman in the corridor either stands or retreats slightly. Even the madam drops her posture of casual control. The officers scan the room. They're not here for a visit. They're here for enforcement. This isn't unusual. Roman law did not forbid prostitution, but it did strictly control how it looked, how it functioned, and where it belonged. Women who broke the rules, intentionally or not, faced punishment. The problem this time, clothing. One of the younger women has been reported. Not by the madam, not by a client, by a matrona, a respectable woman who saw her outside earlier that week wearing a stola, the long, formal dress reserved by law for Roman matrons. It may sound trivial now, but in Rome, clothing was identity. The stola marked a woman as dignified, protected, above suspicion. Prostitutes were explicitly forbidden from wearing it. Their attire had to be clearly distinct. Shorter tunics, brighter colors, sometimes flame-red wigs, anything that marked them publicly and permanently. Wearing the wrong garment wasn't fashion rebellion. It was a legal offense. The accused woman steps forward reluctantly. She's not defiant, just exhausted. One officer speaks to her quietly, while the other questions the madam, who denies all knowledge of the incident. The clerk begins etching notes into the wax with his stylus. Punishments vary. If she's enslaved, her owner may be fined or ordered to enforce stricter discipline. If she's free, she might pay the penalty herself, or worse, be briefly imprisoned. Some women, particularly repeat offenders, are whipped in public or branded on the hand or face. Historians still argue whether these laws were primarily moral or administrative. Did Rome care about virtue or just about clarity? Most scholars agree that the goal wasn't to protect women, but to control them. By making them visually identifiable, the state could maintain its illusion of moral order while profiting from the very thing it pretended to disdain. A fringe detail from an old Roman legal text. In rare cases, a prostitute who wore a stola in public could be sentenced to appear naked in court as punishment, not because the court demanded nudity, but because humiliation was considered corrective, a way to put her back in her place. Back in the brothel, the officers conclude their business quickly. The woman is warned, a fine is issued, the clerk scratches the numbers into his wax tablet with the same casual boredom he might use for grain tallies or livestock disputes. They leave without ceremony, the curtain swings closed, and silence returns. But it's not a peaceful silence. The accused woman sits down heavily, legs shaking. Someone offers her a sip of water. Another presses her shoulder. No one scolds her. They all know it could have been any of them. The madam mutters something about being more careful next time. She means don't get caught. And here's the deeper truth. Most of these women wanted to wear the stola. Not for rebellion, not for fashion, but because it offered invisibility, safety, a moment of dignity in a world that constantly demanded the opposite. To wear the stola was to imagine, just briefly, a different life. But the law doesn't allow dreams, only compliance. One of the women walks to the entrance and peers outside. She watches the officers retreat up the street, their torches bobbing. She squints at the sky. No stars yet, just darkness thickening. She pulls the curtain close, and the brothel exhales. This event will be talked about for days. Quietly, cautiously, but it will ripple. Maybe some will stop going out during daylight. Maybe the others will wear drabber colors. Either way, everyone has been reminded you don't need to commit a crime in Rome to be punished. You just need to forget your place. In a corner of the lupanar, one woman reaches for her flame-colored wig. She adjusts it carefully, tightens the knot. It itches like hell, but she doesn't remove it. The night deepens now. Outside, the moon casts pale silver along the rooftops of Pompeii, and the chaos of the street quiets to a gentle murmur. Fewer sandals scrape the stone. The loud ones have gone to sleep. The dangerous ones are yet to come. Inside the lupanar, the oil lamps are trimmed and flickering, painting golden swirls on plastered walls. And there, right above the main entrance, hangs the most curious decoration in the entire building, a painted phallus. Large, vivid, almost cartoonish. Not lewd, at least not in the Roman sense, but prominent. Red paint, a few stylized flourishes, some even had wings. This one does. You might expect that something like this would be hidden or considered vulgar. But no, these symbols, known as fascina, were placed proudly in full view, both inside and outside Roman brothels. Not as jokes, but as protections. Yes, protections. The Romans didn't see these phallic symbols as obscene. To them, they were apotropaic, objects meant to ward off evil. Just as a horseshoe might hang over a modern doorway, or garlic over a window in folk tradition, the painted phallus was a talisman, a shield against bad fortune, envy, or the dreaded evil eye. And in a place like this, luck mattered. One of the women gazes up at the symbol now, arms folded. She's not praying to it exactly, but there's a sort of reverence in her stillness. Maybe she's asking for a quiet night. Maybe just a kind client. Maybe one who pays double without asking for anything strange. Mainstream historians have cataloged hundreds of these symbols in Roman art. They appear in kitchens, doorways, marketplaces, even in baby cribs. The fascinum, as it was called, was a deeply embedded part of Roman visual culture, and nowhere was it more prevalent than in places tied to birth, death, and sex. Brothels naturally were a prime location. There's a fringe belief that some brothels commissioned artists specifically to paint the walls with these protections. Winged phalluses, erect figures carrying money bags, and even grinning faces with exaggerated features. Not as decoration, but as psychological armor, a painted spell in plaster and pigment. The walls of this lupanar are no exception. Each room features a mural, some erotic, others symbolic. One shows a man leading a donkey by a leash, a phallus swinging comically from both. Another depicts a goddess holding two torches, guiding a man between choices. You can read into it what you will. That's the point. Even the floor tiles play along. Near the entrance, a small mosaic shows another winged phallus with the words, Hic habitat felicitas, here dwells happiness. Whether that was sincere or ironic is anyone's guess. One of the younger women chuckles softly as she passes under the symbol. She taps it once with her finger, just a habit, like knocking wood. You get the sense she does it before every shift, as if checking in with something invisible. It's a small gesture, but it matters. These visual cues weren't just meant for protection, they were also messages. To passers-by, the painted phallus was a signal. You've entered a space where rules are different. A place not of shame, but of transaction. A place where desire, money, and vulnerability all breathe the same air. Historians still debate the deeper meanings of these images. Were they truly magical, or just cultural shorthand? Some scholars argue they were placed to mock power. Others say they were part of state religion, woven into official architecture and private devotion alike. Either way, in the world of the lupanar, they were constants. Back in the main room, one woman scrapes at the edge of a fresco with her thumbnail, not to damage it, just idly, tracing the lines. She's seen this image 100 times. A man reclining with a goblet, a woman kneeling beside him, their poses idealized but familiar. She doesn't romanticize it, but it does make her think. The images that decorate this place, however strange or crude, are the only record anyone has of what she does. There's no diary, no contract, no love letters tucked under her pillow, just painted gestures and the occasional scrawled graffiti. That's what will survive. And perhaps that's why the phallus above the door feels more like a guardian than a joke. It's always been there, watching, pointing, quite literally, inward. A symbol that says, this is the place, this is what we are. But also, perhaps, this is what protects us. Outside, another group passes by. One man stumbles, his companions laugh. They pause at the doorway, glance up at the symbol, and snicker. But they don't enter. Not yet. Just seeing it is sometimes enough. Inside, the women prepare for the next phase of the night. The drunker hours, the bolder clients, the ones who'll need reminding that boundaries exist even here. One woman lights another lamp, adds oil to keep the wick burning. She glances up as the flame flares. The painted phallus glows briefly, in the flickering light. Still here, still watching, still warding off what it can. The moon is high now. The oil lamps flicker like restless fireflies, casting long shadows across the brothel's cracked walls. The air has cooled finally, but only enough to make the heat clinging to the stone feel deliberate, like something it refuses to let go. Inside, the rhythm continues. Footsteps, curtains, coins. But something shifts in the tone, softens in the pace. One of the women lingers near the entrance, adjusting the folds of her tunic more slowly than usual. She keeps glancing toward the doorway, not scanning the street for strangers, but waiting for someone familiar. He appears soon enough, not loud, not dressed to impress. Just a man in his 30s, slightly hunched from daily labor, but clean and, more importantly, expected. He offers a sheepish nod to the madam, who doesn't return it, and walks directly to the same curtain he's approached 4 times this week. 5, if you count that one time he just stood outside, uncertain, before turning away. She's already opened it by the time he reaches it. The room is the same, the bed is the same, but the way she moves isn't. Her shoulders drop slightly. Her hands don't hover as much. She doesn't paste on the same half smile she uses for others, because this isn't just a client anymore. It's a regular, and worse, or better, depending on who's watching, it's a regular who's fallen in love. He tries to hide it. He doesn't bring roses, doesn't make declarations, but the signs are there. He stays longer than he should. He asks questions no one else asks. Did you eat today? Did your curtain rod get fixed? Did that bruise on your wrist heal? She answers some, dodges others. It depends on how tired she is, how much of her real self she can afford to let out. Mainstream portrayals of ancient Roman prostitution rarely touch on this quiet, dangerous phenomenon, affection. But it happened in every age, every city, every version of this trade. Someone always got attached. Sometimes it was the client, sometimes it was the worker, sometimes both. Historians still argue whether these relationships were ever real or merely functional. Some believe women encouraged regulars to become emotionally dependent as a way to secure loyalty and tips. Others suggest that clients projected fantasy onto their chosen woman, seeing depth where she only offered habit. The truth, as usual, lives somewhere in between. There's a fringe story buried in one of Marshall's satirical poems about a man who tried to marry his favorite brothel girl. He was laughed out of court, and yet, the fact that he even tried speaks volumes. In the room now, the man sits on the edge of the bed. He doesn't reach for her right away. He just talks about his work, his brother's wedding, the fish market's bad prices. She listens, not raptly, but not dismissively either. And when he finally does move toward her, it's slower. Not because he's shy, because he's trying to be gentle. It's not passion, it's an attempt at tenderness. And that's what makes it dangerous, because she's seen this before. The way affection turns into expectation, how gifts become guilt, how a man who once admired your independence suddenly insists on saving you from it. He leaves a few coins on the stool when he exits, always a little more than necessary, sometimes with a small wrapped fig, or a tiny perfume vial, or something stolen, like a quill pen or a coin from a province she'll never visit. She accepts them, of course, but never with promises. The other women notice. They always do. One raises an eyebrow, another just mutters. He'll ask her to lave with him soon. It's not said with jealousy, just knowledge, because when a client falls in love, He rarely understands that love won't erase the debt, or the law, or the power imbalance. Love doesn't change the ownership of the building, or the list the taxman keeps, or the bruise she hides beneath her belt, and yet love shows up here anyway. It writes itself into the smallest moments, in a man's hesitation at the curtain, in the way he watches her after, waiting for something more than thanks, in the way she holds the coin just a moment longer before dropping it into the pouch. He'll come back tomorrow, no doubt, and the next day. And one day, maybe he'll ask her to leave with him. Maybe he already has. And maybe, though she'd never admit it, she's thought about it. But not tonight. Tonight, she leans back against the wall after he leaves, closes her eyes, and exhales deeply. Not because she's tired, because she almost felt something, and that's a luxury she can't afford. Outside, the street is nearly quiet. Just a few stragglers left. Inside, the room feels smaller now, like it's holding a secret, and the curtain sways shut again. Night has settled in completely now. Pompeii is lit only by torchlight and the amber flicker of open flame spilling from doorways and taverns. From the brothel's shaded entry, you can hear the last waves of drinking songs echoing from the nearby wine shops. Laughter, slurred and stumbling, fades into the alleys. The lupanar stays open. It always does. But for a few of the women inside, this isn't the final shift. Not everyone ends their workday here, because once the last curtain closes, some don't go to sleep. They head to the baths, not to soak, not to rest, not to steam the aches from their bones. They go because there's more money to be made, where the water runs warm and the guests relax their defenses. The Roman thermae, public bathhouses, were the ultimate social hub. People bathed, yes, but also gambled, gossiped, flirted, struck deals, and occasionally arranged discreet affairs. They weren't quiet temples of hygiene. They were lively, crowded, and ripe for opportunity, especially in the evenings. Brothel women who moonlighted at the baths weren't advertising openly. That was illegal, or at least frowned upon by the bathhouse attendants. But they didn't need to advertise. A glance, a gesture, a shared towel. It didn't take much to make the message clear. Two women slip out the back of the lupanar now, tunics adjusted, hair re-wrapped. Their eyes are alert, their gait brisk. They carry nothing but a small cloth pouch with oil and perfume, tools of trade, but not the kind found in temples. They know the route well, down the alley, past the bakery, left at the statue of Mercury, and through the second entrance to the Stabian baths, the ones with the better lighting and warmer caldarium. Mainstream Roman culture romanticized the baths. They were portrayed as elegant and civilizing, a sign of Roman superiority over the unclean habits of others. But in reality, the thermae were layered, open to almost everyone, from slaves to senators. They were spaces where societal lines blurred just enough to invite possibility, and sometimes propositions. Historians still argue whether prostitution was truly tolerated in the baths or simply ignored by the staff. Officially, the balneater, the bath attendant, could expel anyone suspected of soliciting, but in practice, a coin here, a favor there, and the rules softened. Some say certain bathhouses even worked in cooperation with local brothels to keep a rotation of visitors flowing in discreetly during peak hours. You can imagine the layout: dim halls lined with warm pools, walls echoing with water and conversation. Slaves rush by with towels. Citizens recline on benches, sweating and laughing, voices rising above the steam. And in a corner, Barely noticed at first, one of the brothel women leans against a mosaic wall, adjusting her sandal, meeting someone's gaze. A transaction begins, not in words, but in nods. Timing, a shared understanding. It won't happen here. No, the baths are for invitations, not performance. The real meeting will take place later, behind a curtain in a rented room, or perhaps even back in the brothel itself. The bath is just the hunting ground, a fringe detail from graffiti found near the suburban baths. I paid 2 asses for Claudia and 5 for the hot water. Guess which was more worth it? It's crude, but it proves the point. These encounters were part of the economy. Back at the Lupinar, the madam pretends not to notice who's gone. She knows. She allows it, quietly, because extra coins often find their way into the house cut. Not always, but often enough. One of the returning women slips through the curtain an hour later. Her eyes are tired, but she's smiling, barely. She tosses a wrapped fig onto the low table, a gift from a client who apparently couldn't pay more, but liked her laugh. She keeps the coin, small but real. The baths offer a different kind of interaction. It's less hurried, more strategic. There's room to observe, to read body language, to choose. And because the setting is public, some clients behave better. Not out of respect, but because others are watching. Still, it's risky. A woman caught in the wrong section, too flirtatious with the wrong man, could be reported, fined, even beaten, and there's always the risk of running into a known client with his wife, or worse, someone powerful enough to make her disappear. But the risk, as always, balances with reward. The coins are better, the conversations sometimes kinder, and for a brief hour, in the mist and marble and flowing water, the line between client and visitor blurs just enough to forget what either of them really are. Historians still debate whether these bathhouse moonlighting sessions were part of an organized network or spontaneous acts of initiative. Some argue that certain women formed unofficial collectives, timing their visits to avoid overlap and ensure safety. Others believe it was purely opportunistic. Whoever had the energy went. Whoever didn't stayed behind. Either way, it offered something the brothel rarely did: a change of scenery, a moment to breathe something other than lamp smoke and linen. As the woman settles back onto her stone bed, she unlaces her sandals slowly. Her feet are blistered from walking, and her fingers tremble slightly. She winces, reaches for a cloth dipped in cold water, and presses it to the back of her neck. Tomorrow, she might go again, or not. But tonight, she made enough to cover her tax and keep a little extra. And in this life, that's more than most. It's past midnight now. The Lupinar is quieter than it's been all day, but it's not asleep. It never really sleeps. Behind the curtains, behind the practiced silence, things still shift. Restless bodies on stone beds, whispered jokes, the occasional clink of coin passed from hand to palm. But at this hour the noise softens. The walls hold their breath. A few of the women remain upright. Most are resting, or pretending to. One adjusts her tunic absently. Another oils her legs with the last of her cheap resin balm. They don't expect more clients tonight, but they don't assume the opposite either. It's always wise to stay prepared, just in case a late visitor wanders in. If one did, he'd know instantly what this place is. There's no disguising it, not with the paint on the walls, not with the layout, and certainly not with what the women wear. Because even in the half-light, there's no mistaking them. Their clothing gives them away on purpose. Roman law made sure of that. Unlike freeborn Roman women who were cloaked in long stole, with shawls covering their hair and jewelry signaling virtue, Prostitutes were required to wear a completely different visual code, one that marked them not only as available, but unmistakably separate. Shorter tunics, thin fabric, sometimes dyed in bright or vulgar colors. Some wore flame-colored wigs, especially if their natural hair had been cut, a regulation for women who were enslaved or those caught violating dress codes in public. Others painted their lips unnaturally bright, added rouge to cheeks long since weathered, lined their eyes heavily with soot, not because they were vain, because the law demanded that they be seen. Mainstream Rain society viewed clothing as moral armor. The longer and more modest your garments, the more dignity you were assumed to have. For prostitutes, that armor was stripped away by decree. They were made visible so they could be kept at a distance. Historians still argue whether these rules came from fear of contagion, social, moral, or otherwise, or from a desire to make the hierarchy unmistakable. But there's no question the fabric told a story before the wearer ever opened her mouth. Even shoes mattered. Most Roman women wore closed shoes, particularly in public. But prostitutes often wore sandals that exposed the feet, some even with bells or ankle ties. This wasn't a trend. It was another tool of identification. You could hear them before you saw them, a fringe detail mentioned by some Roman satirists. Women in the meretrix class were sometimes forced to wear a specific brooch engraved with their registered pseudonym, not as branding, but as bureaucratic efficiency. The empire loved lists, and clothing was a walking record. In the lupanar tonight, one of the women stretches out her legs, then sits up and begins combing through her wig. It's matted, the coppery fibers are stiff from sweat and heat. She loosens it gently, careful not to pull too hard. She'll wash it tomorrow, maybe in the public fountain, before sunrise, when the streets are still quiet. Another adjusts her belt, fingers tracing the stitch marks along its frayed edge. It's dyed red, not the crimson of senators, but a raw, streaky red that looks more like spilled wine than status. She pulls it tighter, just enough to keep the tunic from slipping too low. And across the room, in the half shadow, a girl pulls on a second layer, not to warm herself, but to sleep without waking up stiff from stone. It's a faded wool shawl, once dyed purple, now somewhere between bruised plum and dull gray. She wears it only when the curtain is closed, because outside, that color would get her in trouble. Royal colors, reserved colors, and not for girls like her. It's strange how even threads can carry legal weight in Rome. Inside the brothel, though, there are no toga-clad women, no palla-draped matrons with eyes lowered and voices modest. Here, tunics are short, practical, sometimes ripped. Hair is pinned or wigged. Sandals are made for standing, not walking. And yet, for all the law's attempts to shame them, there's something resilient in the way these women dress. Some have modified their outfits, stitched in beads or colored trim. One wears a carved ivory clasp at her waist, probably pilfered from a careless client. Another wears a faded pendant with a tiny bronze hand carved into it. A protection charm, or maybe a joke. No one asks. These small details don't defy the law, but they bend it, quietly, subtly, and that too is a kind of protest. Mainstream Roman culture saw the clothing of prostitutes as a sign of disgrace, but inside the brothel, among the women themselves, it became something else, a shared language, a way to tell who had been here longer, who had a regular, who had recently lost one. There's a quiet sort of pride in that understanding. Outside, a soft breeze stirs the curtain. Somewhere, a dog barks twice and then stops. The oil lamp near the door sputters. One woman rises to trim the wick. She does it carefully, the flame reflecting briefly in her eyes. Her tunic slips as she moves, and for just a moment, her shoulder, bare, marked by time, sun, and the weight of 1,000 anonymous hands, catches the light. Then the curtain falls again, and everything settles into silence. Dawn is still far off, but the night has deepened into something heavy, thick with silence, as if the city is holding its breath. Most of Pompeii is asleep by now. The taverns are closing, the fountains are quiet, and even the dogs have curled into doorways. But here in the Lupanar, a single oil lamp remains lit. In the furthest room, a woman is counting coins, not loudly, not with celebration, just carefully, slowly, one at a time. She isn't smiling. She isn't dreaming. She's calculating. This is her ritual, and tonight it feels slightly different because the amount is just enough. Enough to think about it, enough to wonder. Could this be the start? In the Roman world, freedom wasn't just a concept. For many prostitutes, especially those who were enslaved or contracted, it was a literal, legal possibility. One you could earn, one you could buy. If you had the right status, if you had enough coin, if you had a patron, or protection, or luck. Freedom was called manumitio, and it could come in many forms. Granted by an owner, purchased through years of saved wages, or won through favor. But it was rare, hard-won, and almost always tangled in legal knots. This woman, let's call her Amara, isn't foolish. She knows her situation. She knows the madam keeps a cut of every visit, that her room and meals are technically deducted from her share, that her total savings are likely being shadowed by invented debts. But she also knows how many coins she's hidden behind the cracked tile under her bed. She knows which regulars are generous, and she knows that one of them, a freedman with connections, once offered to help her out if she could match him coin for coin. So now she counts. Historians often gloss over this part. They mention that some women earned their freedom and went on to marry, open taverns, even own property. But they rarely focus on the effort it took. The decades, the backroom negotiations, the careful silence, and they never tell you how many didn't make it. There's a fringe reference in one surviving legal tablet of a woman named Vetia, once enslaved, later registered as a freedwoman, owner of a small bakery near the Forum. She left behind a tiny will, 2 silver rings, 1 linen tunic, and a carved wooden comb. No mention of her past. But she had a name, a shop, a lock on her door. Back in the Lupanar, Amara tucks the coins away again. She wraps them in a rag and presses them under the tile, then smooths the bedding over the spot. Her face is unreadable. Another woman, older, sits nearby with her back against the wall. She's seen girls count coins before. She's seen girls disappear too, some toward freedom, others toward worse. She says nothing. In this world, freedom is never just about money. It's about timing, about who notices and who doesn't. For those who do manage to buy their way out, the path is still steep. A freedwoman, Liberta, gains some rights. She can work, own property, and even marry, but she often remains tied to her former owner in legal ways, obligated to them in service, inheritance, or loyalty. Some brothel owners even structured freedom as a contract. You may go, but you owe me 5 years of work in another form, cleaning, managing, procuring. Others weren't so formal. They just let the girl go, quietly, without fanfare. And still others said they would, and didn't. The law was there. but enforcement was loose, especially for women who had no family, no advocate, and no voice. That's why the counting matters. Every coin is leverage. Every saved denarius is a step closer to a door with no curtain. The younger girls watch Amara, though they pretend not to. One wonders if she'll make it. One hopes she will. One fears what happens if she does, because if someone can escape, then staying becomes a choice, and that's harder to live with. The madam, they all assume, knows about the hidden coin pile. She hasn't said anything yet. Maybe she's waiting for it to grow. Maybe she's adding it to the ledger already, quietly charging for oil, bread, and straw by the gram. Still, Amara counts, not because she's naive, but because not counting would mean surrender. There's a strange dignity in that. Historians still debate whether the women who gained freedom were the lucky ones or the strategic ones. Did they charm their way out? Work twice as hard? Steal just enough? The answer is likely yes to all. Back in the quiet room, the oil lamp burns lower. Amara lies down, slowly, eyes open. She doesn't sleep yet. She's picturing something. Not a palace, not a banquet, just a room with a lock, a bed that belongs to her, a day that begins without curtain calls, a tomorrow that's hers to waste. Outside, the city is still. Inside, the dream remains folded beneath the tile. For now. The sky above Pompeii has turned a deep violet. The first suggestion of dawn stretched thin across the eastern edge. In just a little while, the birds will begin. Then the grocers. Then the coughing of old men lighting the day's first fires. But now, in this final hour of night, the city holds a peculiar stillness, the kind that comes before disruption, and that's when it happens. A tremor, so small it might be mistaken for a dropped cup or a heavy footstep. The women feel it in their ankles first, then in the beds beneath them. A rattle in the wall, a low moan, like a beast buried under the earth, turning over in its sleep. It passes quickly, too quickly to panic, but not quickly enough to ignore. They look at each other, eyes wide. Then they do what everyone does in Pompeii when the ground moves. Pretend it didn't. Because here, earthquakes aren't rare. They happen the way thunder does, suddenly, then gone. No one stops working. The city rebuilds. And besides, everyone remembers the last one. That big one, 17 years ago, in 62 AD. The one that cracked columns and broke temples. The one that left this brothel half collapsed for months. They remember how long it took to fill the rooms again. But tonight, it's just a tremor, a warning, or maybe nothing. The madam grumbles, rubs her temples. A woman mutters a quiet curse to Vulcan under her breath. Another jokes that the gods are just tossing in their sleep. Then they go back to theirs. But something in the room feels shifted now, as if the walls themselves are holding a secret, because this won't be the last tremor, and the next one won't be quiet. Mainstream history gives us only a few eyewitness accounts of what happened in 79 AD, when Mount Vesuvius erupted and blanketed Pompeii in ash. The letters of Pliny the Younger describe panic, darkness, and suffocation. But inside places like this brothel, the stories went silent. No one wrote down how the prostitutes fled, or didn't. There's a fringe archaeological theory, based on the positions of bones found near the brothel, that suggests several women tried to escape. They were found curled near the exit, arms over their heads, as if the roof had fallen before they reached the door. Whether they hesitated too long, or simply had nowhere else to go, no one knows. But we do know this: no one came back for them. When Pompeii's upper-class residents fled in litters and on horseback, carrying jewelry and family gods, The brothel was left behind. Not deliberately, not maliciously, just automatically. The way you leave behind a shop, or a tool, or something replaceable. That's how the city saw these women. One of the girls lies awake now, staring at the ceiling. She doesn't know she's living in history's final hours. She doesn't know her room will be sealed in ash, her bed preserved for centuries, her name forgotten. She only knows that the floor shook once, and that it might again. Historians still argue about how much warning Pompeii really had. Some say there were signs for days, earthquakes, animal behavior, water turning strange. Others believe the eruption was sudden, catastrophic, impossible to escape. But either way, no one truly prepared, especially not the brothels. The women here didn't have escape plans. They didn't have carts or villas in the countryside. Most didn't even have shoes thick enough to run across pumice-strewn streets. They had curtains and coins and instinct. One of them, sitting in the corner now, quietly counts her earnings again. The same pile from earlier. She's just thinking of rent, of bread, of maybe replacing the worn part of her sandal strap. She doesn't realize how useless all of that is about to become. Another woman, still half asleep, rolls over and pulls her tunic tight. Her dreams are uneasy. A third finally dozes off, clutching a ragged cloth doll, one she found months ago in the gutter and never explained to anyone. These are the final hours before erasure, before time freezes the lupanar in volcanic stone and plaster, before tourists, centuries later, will peer into these rooms with uncomfortable fascination, pointing at the beds and murals, taking photos of what they call history, not realizing how recently these women lived and breathed and laughed. Even the painted phallus above the doorway will survive, but the names behind the curtains? Gone. Outside, another tremor rolls through, stronger this time. The walls creak. The lamp near the door wobbles. This one wakes everyone. Still, they do not run. No one does. Not yet, because they don't know. They don't know that the mountain looming in the distance, so familiar, so still, is no longer asleep. They don't know that by this time tomorrow, everything around them will be buried under 13 feet of ash. The brothel will fall silent for nearly 2,000 years. But tonight, they still wait, still whisper, still count, still live. The earliest light brushes over Pompeii, soft and pale, like a secret the sky hasn't fully committed to sharing. The sun hasn't broken the horizon yet, but its presence is felt, just enough to give the alleyways their shapes again. The night has passed, and the brothel stirs. Inside the lupanar, the air is still heavy with everything that came before. Breath, oil, wine, whispers. It clings to the walls, settles into the folds of tunics, sits in the space between beds that haven't truly cooled. The oil lamps have burned low, one guttered out completely, its wick now curled in a pool of blackened wax. Someone coughs, another groans softly and rolls over. One curtain is already pulled back, revealing a woman sitting upright, combing through her hair with her fingers. There's no mirror, no ceremony, just routine. Her face is blank, not sad, not angry, just ready. It's morning again, another day, another set of footsteps, another round of surviving. She stretches her legs, rolls her shoulder. Her knees crack, quiet but telling. She slept poorly, like always. It wasn't the bed. It was everything else. The woman beside her is already up. She's dipping a cloth into the clay water basin, rinsing her face with long, slow movements. The water's not fresh. It hasn't been since yesterday. but it'll do. It always does. There's no real conversation yet. That'll come later, when the women are more alert, when they've counted bruises, wiped their mouths, and remembered who owes who what. Right now, there's just movement. One by one, the rest rise. A couple are slower this morning. One limps slightly. Another is squinting through swollen eyes, the result of a particularly rough client hours before. No one asks. She doesn't offer. The madam appears in the hallway, her footsteps sharp. She's already dressed, already sour. She's holding a cloth, wiping her hands, likely having counted the night's coin before the women were even awake. She doesn't greet anyone. She never does. Breakfast appears, a piece of hard bread, a few olives, and a small cup of diluted wine. Same as always. Same as forever. Mainstream Rowan accounts never detail these mornings. The mundane return to duty. The way the curtain feels heavier after too little sleep. The way the body aches before it's even been touched. But these moments are real, repeating, endlessly familiar. And they're not dramatic, just quiet and heavy. The painted murals on the wall, those bright, acrobatic depictions of pleasure, now look faded in the new light. Garish, even. One of the women glances at them as she passes, but doesn't linger. She's long stopped noticing them. They aren't for her. The symbols, the performance, the poses, they're all part of the structure. But behind the curtain, in this hour, there is no performance, only preparation. One girl refastens her tunic, still stiff from yesterday's sweat. Another tightens the belt around her waist, fingers working mechanically. A few rub their wrists where bangles have left red marks. Someone winces as she stands. Her knee gave out last week. It hasn't recovered. It probably won't. And yet she stands. Outside, the first customers of the day pass by on their way to the forum. Some glance at the door. Some don't. A pair of laborers mutter something and laugh as they walk past. The women don't hear it, or pretend not to. Inside, someone hums a tune under her breath, an old song from childhood, likely misremembered. No one joins in, but no one tells her to stop either. The floor is swept, the curtains are adjusted, the front entrance is unlocked again. The day begins, just like the one before, just like the one after. Historians still argue how many women worked in places like this, whether they numbered in the dozens, the hundreds, the thousands across the empire. But the number hardly matters, because no matter how many, the rhythm was always the same. Work, wait, endure, sleep, wake, repeat. A fringe inscription from a Pompeian wall reads, "I begin again with the rising sun. Let it be better than the last." It's unclear who wrote it, a client, a poet, or maybe, just maybe, a girl who knew this room, this bed, this stone floor beneath her feet. As the full light of morning rises, the curtain ripples softly in the breeze. The room is ready. The women are ready. And behind their practiced eyes is that same flicker you've seen from the beginning, something between defiance and resignation, because another day has come, and they are still here, still waiting, still surviving. Now the brothel fades. Its stone walls cool as the morning warms. The voices grow faint, the footsteps slower, until even the echoes soften into stillness. The beds are empty now. The curtains no longer sway. The city of Pompeii, so loud, so alive, rests in silence beneath layers of ash, frozen not just in time, but in memory. And those women, they're still there, not in body perhaps, but in gesture, in mural, in graffiti scratched with a hurried hand. Their names lost, but their presence unmistakable. You saw them move through routine, through injury, through laughter that didn't always mean joy. You felt the flickers of hope beneath calloused pragmatism, the quiet acts of resistance, the exhausted resilience. Maybe now, lying there in your own quiet room, you think of the way their stories weren't preserved in scrolls or temples, but in the dust of stone beds and the shape of worn sandals, in the tilt of a painted face on a wall, in a single coin tucked beneath a tile. And maybe that's enough, because even if history forgot their names, it remembered their rhythm. So breathe slowly now. Let their world slip gently from your thoughts. Let the images soften. Let the sounds dissolve. The lamp is out. The streets are quiet, and the women have laid down their burdens, at least for this night. You're safe. You're still. Let sleep come, like the last breeze through a shaded curtain, soft, certain, and kind. So sweet dreams.